In the winter of 1944, as Hitler's forces desperately clung to their conquered territories, one American general accomplished what many thought impossible, forcing the elite 1st SS Panzer Division, Hitler's fanatical bodyguards, to retreat for the first time in the war. This is the untold story of how General George S. Patton broke the myth of the undefeatable Waffen-SS and changed the course of World War II. The bitter cold gripped the snow-covered Ardennes Forest as the men of the 101st Airborne Division huddled in their foxholes. The date was the 16th of December 1944, and Hitler had just launched his desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and potentially turn the tide of the war. The massive German offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, had caught American forces completely by surprise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Among the German units spearheading the assault was the feared 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal bodyguard unit transformed into an elite armoured division. Led by the fanatical SS Oberführer Wilhelm Mohnke, these battle-hardened veterans had never retreated from any battlefield since the war began. They were considered the pride of Nazi Germany's military machine, ruthless, disciplined, and utterly devoted to their Führer. The American forces in their path were scattered and disorganized, communication lines had been cut, supplies were dwindling, and the weather was too poor for air support. The situation looked dire, as German Panther and Tiger tanks pushed deeper into Allied territory, leaving destruction in their wake. 200 miles away, at his headquarters in Luxembourg, Lieutenant General George S. Patton was in the middle of planning an offensive toward the Saar River when news of the German breakthrough reached him. Unlike many of his fellow commanders who were shocked into inaction, Patton had anticipated Hitler might attempt such a desperate move. The Krauts stuck his head in a meat grinder, Patton told his staff officers, his eyes gleaming with determination, and this time I've got hold of the handle. While other generals hesitated, Patton immediately began preparations to pivot his entire Third Army 90 degrees north to strike at the southern flank of the German penetration. It was a maneuver that military experts would later describe as one of the most remarkable operational movements in the history of warfare. "We're going to attack," Patton declared during an emergency meeting with his corps commanders. "We're going to go through the Krauts like crap through a goose." The logistical challenge was immense. Patton needed to reorient nearly 250,000 men, thousands of vehicles, and all their supplies in the dead of winter, across icy roads, while maintaining operational security. Most military planners estimated such a maneuver would take at least 2 weeks. Patton promised to do it in 48 hours. Back in the Ardennes, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The 101st Airborne and elements of the 10th Armoured Division had been ordered to hold the vital crossroads town of Bastogne at all costs. Surrounded on all sides, they faced repeated assaults from the 1st SS Panzer Division, whose Tiger tanks could destroy American Shermans from distances where the American tanks couldn't even penetrate German armour. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding the 101st, received a German demand for surrender. His famous one-word reply, "nuts," embodied the American spirit of resistance, but brave words alone couldn't stop panzer tanks or replenish dwindling ammunition and medical supplies. The men of the 101st knew they were fighting against time. Either reinforcements would break through, or they would be overrun by the relentless German assault. Many soldiers wrote farewell letters to their families, not expecting to see another Christmas. Meanwhile, Patton was pushing his men to the limits of human endurance. The Third Army's chaplain, Father James O'Neill, had composed a prayer asking for clear weather for the offensive. Patton had it printed on cards and distributed to every soldier in the army. "Sir, that's asking for a miracle," one staff officer commented. "A good soldier is not necessarily a religious man," Patton replied, "but a good soldier has profound faith in something. I believe in this prayer. I believe in the men of the Third Army." Against all odds, the skies cleared on December 23rd. Allied air forces could finally provide support, and Patton's massive columns pushed north at breakneck speed through snow-covered roads. The Third Army was coming. At his forward headquarters, Patton pored over intelligence reports about the German forces his men would soon engage. The 1st SS Panzer Division had built a fearsome reputation since its formation. Originally created as Hitler's personal bodyguard, the unit had evolved into an elite armoured division that spearheaded many of Germany's most successful offensives. "They've never retreated," Patton's intelligence officer noted. "Not in Poland, not in France, not in Russia. They fight to the last man." "Every unit retreats when it's beaten badly enough," Patton responded, tapping his riding crop against the map. "And I intend to beat them very badly indeed." The 1st SS Panzer Division had earned its reputation through both skill and brutality. During the early years of the war, they had been at the forefront of Germany's lightning campaigns across Europe. In Russia, they had distinguished themselves in numerous battles against Soviet forces. Their tanks were commanded by some of Germany's most decorated soldiers, men who had destroyed dozens of enemy vehicles and lived to boast about it. But it wasn't just their military prowess that made them feared. The unit had been implicated in numerous war crimes, including the infamous Malmedy massacre just days earlier, where they had executed 84 American prisoners of war in cold blood. They were not just soldiers, they were true believers in Nazi ideology, indoctrinated to view their enemies as subhuman. As Patton's forces approached the battlefield, the men of the Third Army understood what they were up against. The 4th Armoured Division, serving as the spearhead of Patton's relief force, would bear the brunt of the coming confrontation with the 1st SS Panzer Division. "They've got better tanks than us," acknowledged Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion. "But we've got more of them, and we've got Patton." Abrams, a future Army Chief of Staff, had earned Patton's respect through his aggressive tactics and leadership. His battalion's motto, "Courage Conquers," would soon be put to the ultimate test against Germany's elite. On Christmas Day, 1944, as families across America gathered around their dinner tables and radios for news from the front, the men of the 4th Armoured Division were fighting through snow-covered forests and icy roads, pushing ever closer to Bastogne. Intelligence reports indicated that elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division had established blocking positions along the route. The weather had turned against the Germans. The clear skies allowed Allied aircraft to pound German supply lines, while Patton's forces maintained their relentless advance. The 1st SS Panzer Division, now running low on fuel due to the air attacks, could no longer maneuver with the freedom that had made them so effective earlier in the offensive. The collision between Patton's advancing forces and the elite German division occurred near the small Belgian village of Ardennes, just 5 miles from Bastogne. In the early morning hours of December 26th, tanks from the 37th Tank Battalion encountered a strong German defensive position manned by SS troops with anti-tank guns and infantry support. What followed was one of the most intense armoured engagements of the war. German 88mm guns, the most feared anti-tank weapons of World War II, knocked out several American Shermans in the opening minutes of the battle. The Americans, however, kept coming, using their numerical advantage and tactical flexibility to outflank the German positions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Captain William Dwight, leading a company of Sherman tanks, saw 3 of his vehicles destroyed in quick succession by German fire. Rather than retreat, he ordered his remaining tanks to advance at full speed, firing their main guns and machine guns continuously to suppress the German positions. "We're going through," he shouted over the radio. "Keep moving no matter what." By maintaining their momentum, the American tanks broke through the initial German defences before they could be targeted effectively. Once through, they spread out, attacking the German positions from the rear, where their armour was thinner and their guns were not oriented. Meanwhile, Patton had moved his headquarters forward to better coordinate the attack. Standing in a cold, snow-covered command post, he received continuous updates from the front. When told that the 37th Tank Battalion had encountered heavy resistance but was continuing to advance, he nodded with satisfaction. "That's why I put Abrams in the lead," he said. He knows the difference between caution and timidity. The battle raged throughout the day. The 1st SS Panzer Division fought with the desperate ferocity of elite troops who had never known defeat. Their Tiger tanks, though few in number due to fuel shortages, remained deadly opponents that could destroy American Shermans from long range. But Patton had anticipated this disadvantage. American tank destroyers, equipped with more powerful guns, were positioned to support the Shermans. Artillery was called in with precision to suppress German positions, and always there was the relentless pressure of more American tanks arriving hourly. By late afternoon, something unprecedented began to occur. The 1st SS Panzer units, facing encirclement and destruction, began to pull back from their positions. At first, it was an orderly tactical withdrawal to more defensible terrain, but as American pressure increased and more units broke through toward Bastogne, the withdrawal threatened to become something the 1st SS had never experienced: a retreat. SS Oberfuhrer Mohnke, commanding the division's rear guard, received increasingly desperate messages from his forward units. Fuel was critically low. American air attacks had destroyed much of their supply convoy, and now Patton's tanks were breaking through their lines at multiple points. "We must hold until reinforcements arrive," Mohnke ordered. "The Führer expects us to stand our ground," but the strategic situation had become untenable. American forces had created a narrow corridor to Bastogne, breaking the siege of the 101st Airborne. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the 1st SS Panzer Division was not invincible. They could be outfought, outmaneuvered, and forced to give ground. As night fell on December 26th, Mohnke made the decision that no commander of the 1st SS had ever made before: a general withdrawal to prevent the complete destruction of his force. The elite division that had never retreated in 5 years of war was pulling back in the face of Patton's relentless assault. In his headquarters, Patton received the news with characteristic bravado but private satisfaction. "They're running," he told his staff. "Now we'll show them what a real pursuit looks like." For the trapped defenders of Bastogne, the arrival of the 4th Armored Division meant salvation. As the first American tanks rolled into the besieged town, the exhausted men of the 101st Airborne cheered despite their fatigue. The siege had been broken. The success of the operation sent shockwaves through the German High Command. Field Marshal Model, commanding Army Group B, was forced to report to Hitler that the elite 1st SS Panzer Division had been compelled to retreat and that the momentum of the Ardennes offensive had been lost. Hitler, already prone to furious outbursts, was incandescent with rage. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler was his personal creation, named after him and entrusted with upholding the honor of National Socialist Germany. Their retreat was not just a military setback, it was a personal affront. "They will return to the attack immediately," Hitler demanded. "No unit bearing my name retreats." But the military reality on the ground had changed irrevocably. Patton's Third Army had accomplished what many thought impossible. They had met Nazi Germany's most fanatical troops on the battlefield and defeated them. The myth of SS invincibility had been shattered. For General Patton, the victory was vindication of his aggressive leadership style and his faith in the fighting qualities of American soldiers. He had promised to relieve Bastogne within 48 hours of receiving the order, and his army had delivered despite overwhelming odds. "We didn't just beat them," Patton later wrote in his diary. "We showed them what American fighting men can do when properly led." The so-called elite of the German army broke and ran before our advance. The Battle of the Bulge would continue for several more weeks as Allied forces slowly pushed the German salient back. But the critical turning point had been reached. The 1st SS Panzer Division, having suffered its first retreat, would never regain its aura of invincibility. More importantly, the German offensive had failed in its strategic objectives, squandering precious reserves that could have been used to defend Germany itself. For the men who fought in those frozen forests and fields, the victory came at a terrible cost. Thousands of Americans had been killed, wounded, or captured during the German offensive, but they had prevailed against Hitler's last desperate gamble, and in doing so, they had hastened the end of the Third Reich. Patton, never one to rest on his laurels, was already planning his next offensive. "The enemy has shot his wad," he told his commanders. "Now we'll show him what American armor can really do." The defeat of the 1st SS Panzer Division marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany's military ambitions. Within 5 months, the Third Reich would collapse entirely. And it all began in the snow-covered forests of Belgium, where General George S. Patton and the men of the Third Army accomplished what many had thought impossible. The story of Patton's confrontation with the 1st SS Panzer Division spread rapidly through the Allied forces, boosting morale at a critical juncture in the war. For the ordinary American soldier, the knowledge that Hitler's elite troops could be beaten was as warming as a shot of whiskey in the bitter Belgian winter. General Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, recognized the psychological impact of this victory. In a private meeting with his senior staff, he remarked, "Patton has given us more than a tactical victory. He's shown our men that the Germans are not supermen." The 1st SS Panzer Division, meanwhile, was struggling to reconcile itself with the unfamiliar taste of defeat. For years they had cultivated an aura of invincibility. Their commander, Wilhelm Mohnke, had to report directly to Hitler via radio, explaining how the unthinkable had happened. "My Führer," Mohnke began, choosing his words carefully, "we were forced to conduct a temporary withdrawal due to fuel shortages and overwhelming enemy numbers." Hitler's response was predictably furious. "The Leibstandarte does not withdraw. It advances or it dies in place. You have disgraced your unit and your oath." What Mohnke couldn't fully articulate to Hitler was the shock his men had experienced when confronted with Patton's relentless assault. The Americans hadn't fought according to the conventional wisdom of the time. Where other Allied generals might have proceeded cautiously against the feared SS Division, Patton had attacked with abandon, overwhelming the Germans through sheer aggressive momentum. As January 1945 dawned, the strategic situation had shifted dramatically. The German offensive had been contained, and Allied forces were beginning to squeeze the Bulge out of their lines. The weather had improved, allowing Allied air superiority to wreak havoc on German supply lines and troop movements. The 1st SS Panzer Division, once the spearhead of Hitler's ambitious offensive, was now fighting desperately to avoid encirclement. Patton, never one to rest on his laurels, was pushing his Third Army harder than ever. "We've got them by the throat," he told his corps commanders during a strategy session in early January. "Now we don't just push them back, we destroy them." The general's personal battle against the 1st SS had taken on a dimension beyond mere military strategy. For Patton, they represented everything he despised about Nazi Germany: their fanaticism, their brutality, and their blind obedience to a madman. The reports of the Malmedy massacre, where SS troops had executed American prisoners, had filled him with cold fury. "We're not just beating an enemy," he told Colonel Charles Codman, his aide-de-camp. "We're excising a cancer from civilization." This perspective filtered down through the ranks. The men of the Third Army, already devoted to their flamboyant and successful commander, fought with renewed determination. They understood they were making history, not just winning battles, but breaking the back of Hitler's most feared military formation. On January 8th, near the Belgian town of Houffalize, elements of the 6th Armoured Division encountered a strong defensive position held by remnants of the 1st SS Panzer. Intelligence reports indicated that SS Standartenführer Joachim Peiper, one of the division's most aggressive battalion commanders and the officer implicated in the Malmedy massacre, was personally leading the defense. Colonel William Reed, commanding the American armored force, studied the German positions through his binoculars. The terrain favored the defenders a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, with excellent fields of fire for anti-tank weapons. A frontal assault would be costly. If Patton were here, Reed mused to his operations officer, what would he do? The answer came to him immediately: don't do what the enemy expects. Instead of attacking the strong point directly, Reed divided his forces. A small group would demonstrate against the German front, while the majority of his tanks made a wide flanking movement through difficult terrain to strike the SS position from behind. The maneuver was executed with precision despite the challenging conditions. As American tanks appeared behind their positions, the SS troops found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Paper, recognizing the danger of complete encirclement, ordered yet another withdrawal. For the second time in as many weeks, the 1st SS Panzer was retreating before American forces. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. American tankers, who had been taught to fear the superior German Panthers and Tigers, now pursued them aggressively. The myth had been broken, replaced by a new narrative. American determination was overcoming German technological advantages. Back at Third Army headquarters, Patton received the news with satisfaction. "The difference between us and them," he remarked to his staff, "is that they fight for a man and we fight for something greater, freedom and our way of life." The general's personal vendetta against the 1st SS continued to shape his operational decisions. When intelligence reports indicated that elements of the division were attempting to withdraw to more favorable terrain near St. Vith, Patton immediately redirected his forces to intercept them. "I want that unit destroyed as an effective fighting force," he ordered. "Not just defeated, destroyed." The opportunity came on January 13th, when aerial reconnaissance spotted a large German column moving along a narrow forest road. The vehicles were identified as belonging to the 1st SS Panzer Division's support elements, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and maintenance vehicles. Without these supplies, the division's remaining tanks would be useless. Patton immediately ordered an airstrike. P-47 Thunderbolts swooped down on the convoy, their 50-caliber machine guns and rockets tearing through the thin-skinned vehicles. Explosions rippled along the road as ammunition trucks detonated. By the time the smoke cleared, the 1st SS had lost most of its remaining supplies and support equipment. The division, once the pride of the Waffen-SS, was being systematically dismantled. Its reputation for invincibility had been shattered at Bastogne. Its offensive capability had been blunted by fuel shortages and air attacks. Now, its support infrastructure was in ruins. What remained was a collection of battle groups still dangerous, still fanatical, but no longer an effective division-level force. In Berlin, the German High Command was coming to terms with the implications of the 1st SS Panzer Division's defeat. Field Marshal Keitel, Hitler's pliant chief of the Armed Forces High Command, struggled to explain the situation to the increasingly unstable Führer. "The Leibstandarte has suffered temporary setbacks," Keitel began cautiously during a situation briefing. Hitler cut him off. "There are no temporary setbacks in this war, only victories or betrayals. Who is responsible for this disgrace?" The truth that Patton had simply outgeneraled and outfought the vaunted SS division was unacceptable to Hitler. Instead, he focused his rage on phantom saboteurs and defeatists within the German ranks. As January progressed, the remnants of the 1st SS Panzer Division continued to fight delaying actions as they withdrew toward the German border. They were no longer an offensive force. Their mission now was simple survival. The division that had proudly borne Hitler's name and had never known retreat before Bastogne was now fighting desperately to avoid annihilation. For General Patton, the victory over the 1st SS represented a personal triumph as well as a military one. He had faced Germany's best and beaten them through a combination of audacity, speed, and tactical flexibility. More importantly, he had proven that American soldiers, properly led and motivated, could overcome any adversary, even those with superior equipment and years of combat experience. During a press conference in late January, a reporter asked Patton about the significance of defeating the 1st SS Panzer Division. "They were supposed to be unbeatable," the reporter noted. "What made the difference?" Patton's response was characteristically blunt. "They fight for a madman. We fight for our homes and our liberty. In the end, that makes all the difference in the world." The Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 25, 1945, as Allied forces restored their original line. The cost had been high, over 100,000 casualties for both sides combined, but the strategic impact was decisive. Germany had gambled its last operational reserves on the offensive and lost. Now the path to the Rhine, and into Germany itself, lay open. For the 1st SS Panzer Division, the battle marked the beginning of the end. What remained of the once elite unit was withdrawn to Germany for refitting, but shortages of fuel, spare parts, and trained replacements made full recovery impossible. They would fight on until the final days of the war, but never again as the dominant force they had been. The division's defeat had ripple effects throughout the German military. The myth of SS superiority, carefully cultivated through years of propaganda and battlefield success, had been punctured. If the Leibstandarte could be beaten, what did that mean for other German formations? On February 7, 1945, as Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany, General Eisenhower visited Third Army headquarters. In a private conversation with Patton, he acknowledged the psychological importance of what had been accomplished. "You did more than break their line, George," Eisenhower said. "You broke their spirit." Patton nodded. The 1st SS thought they were invincible because they'd never faced an opponent willing to move faster and hit harder than they did. "We showed them what American fighting men can really do." The story of how Patton's Third Army had forced the elite 1st SS Panzer Division to retreat for the first time in the war quickly became legend among American troops. It was more than just a tactical victory. It was proof that the tide had turned irrevocably against Nazi Germany. As the Allies pushed into Germany in March 1945, they encountered increasingly desperate resistance. Hitler had ordered that there would be no more retreats. German forces would stand and fight to the death. For many Waffen-SS units, this was not just an order but an ideological imperative. They knew what awaited them if Germany lost the war. The remnants of the 1st SS Panzer Division were committed to the defense of the Rhine, Germany's historic natural barrier. With barely 30 operational tanks remaining from their original strength, they prepared to make their last significant stand against the American advance. Patton, meanwhile, was planning one of the most audacious operations of his career, the crossing of the Rhine River. Intelligence had identified elements of the 1st SS among the defending forces, a fact that Patton noted with satisfaction. "We've beaten them twice already," he told his staff. "Now we'll finish the job." On March 22, 1945, Patton's forces achieved what the German High Command had thought impossible, an unopposed crossing of the Rhine near Oppenheim. While attention was focused on Montgomery's heavily publicized crossing operation to the north, Patton had quietly slipped elements of the 5th Infantry Division across the river under cover of darkness. By morning, American engineers had established pontoon bridges, and armored units were pouring across. The German defences, including the battle groups of the 1st SS Panzer Division, were caught completely by surprise. When informed that Patton had crossed the Rhine, Hitler flew into one of his now frequent rages. "It's impossible!" he shouted. "The Rhine cannot be crossed without massive preparations that we would have detected." But Patton had done the impossible once again. Within 24 hours, over 18,000 American troops and dozens of tanks had crossed the river. The German defensive line collapsed as American forces expanded their bridgehead rapidly in all directions. The remaining elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division fought desperately to contain the American breakthrough, but they were overwhelmed by superior numbers and air power. In a bitter irony, the division that had spearheaded Germany's lightning advances across Europe in 1940 was now powerless to stop the American blitzkrieg into the German heartland. By the end of March, what remained of the once mighty division was retreating eastward in disarray. The unit that had never retreated before meeting Patton was now being driven relentlessly across its own homeland. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, disturbing discoveries were made that shed new light on the nature of the enemy they had been fighting. Liberation of concentration camps revealed the full horror of Nazi atrocities. The 1st SS Panzer Division, like other Waffen-SS units, was implicated in war crimes throughout their operational history. For Patton, these revelations reinforced his conviction that the campaign against Nazi Germany had been more than just a conventional war. It had been a necessary struggle against a profound evil. The defeat of elite units like the 1st SS Panzer Division wasn't just a military victory, but a moral one as well. In April 1945, as American forces pushed towards central Germany, intelligence reports indicated that the final remnants of the 1st SS Panzer Division had been ordered to the vicinity of Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps. It was believed that fanatical SS units would make a last stand to protect Nazi leadership, seeking refuge in the Alpine fortress. Patton, his competitive spirit undiminished, was determined to reach the symbolic target before other Allied formations. "I want to be the one who captures Hitler's eagle's nest," he told his staff, referring to Hitler's mountain residence. The Third Army advanced at an astonishing pace, covering more ground in less time than any comparable military formation in history. Towns and cities fell in rapid succession as the remaining German resistance crumbled. The once feared 1st SS Panzer Division had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, with isolated battle groups fighting delaying actions with whatever weapons they could cobble together. On May 4, 1945, elements of the 3rd Infantry Division, part of Patton's Third Army, reached Berchtesgaden. They found that Hitler was already dead, having committed suicide in his Berlin bunker days earlier. The Alpine fortress had proven to be more myth than reality. Instead of a fanatical last stand, they encountered mainly abandoned equipment and surrendering troops. Among the prisoners were several officers from the 1st SS Panzer Division, including an SS Sturmbannführer who had served with the unit since before the war. When asked by his American captors about the division's defeats during the Ardennes campaign, he gave a response that reflected the psychological impact of Patton's leadership. "We had never faced a general like Patton before," the officer admitted. "He did not fight according to the rules we understood. When we expected him to be cautious, he attacked. When we prepared for an attack, he appeared where we least expected him. For the first time, we faced an opponent who was more aggressive than we were." This assessment was perhaps the most fitting epitaph for the 1st SS Panzer Division's war record. They had been defeated not just by American material superiority, but by a commander whose audacity and aggression exceeded even their own fanatical standards. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The Third Reich, which Hitler had boasted would last 1,000 years, had been destroyed in just 12, and the 1st SS Panzer Division, once the embodiment of Nazi military prowess, had been reduced to scattered groups of prisoners and fugitives. In the aftermath of victory, Patton reflected on the campaign that had broken the myth of SS invincibility. "War is a simple thing," he wrote in his diary. "It's about killing the enemy and advancing. Everything else is secondary." The 1st SS forgot that simple truth. They thought their reputation would protect them, but reputation doesn't stop a tank round. The defeat of the 1st SS Panzer Division became a case study at military academies around the world. It demonstrated how psychological factors, the belief in one's invincibility, or conversely, the shock of unexpected defeat, could influence battlefield outcomes as much as material factors like tank armor or gun caliber. More broadly, it showed how a commander's personality could shape an entire campaign. Patton's aggressive instincts, his willingness to take calculated risks, and his profound understanding of the psychological dimension of warfare had been decisive in defeating Germany's elite forces. For the veterans of the Third Army who had faced the 1st SS Panzer Division in the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes, there was a special pride in knowing they had been the first to defeat Hitler's personal guard unit. They had faced the best the enemy had to offer and emerged victorious. As one sergeant from the 4th Armoured Division later put it, "When we heard we were up against the 1st SS, there was some nervous talk in the ranks. These were supposed to be supermen, but after we hit them at Bastogne and made them run, we realized something important: they bled just like anyone else." This realization that even the most feared enemy formations were ultimately vulnerable carried forward into American military thinking in the post-war era. The myth of the invincible adversary had been permanently dispelled. With the right leadership, tactics, and determination, any enemy could be defeated. Patton himself didn't live to see the full historical assessment of his achievements. He died in December 1945, following an automobile accident in Germany, but his legacy lived on in the doctrine and spirit of the U.S. Army he had helped to shape. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unlikely source. Years after the war, a former German general who had fought against Patton's forces was asked about the American commander's most significant contribution to the Allied victory. After a moment's reflection, the German officer replied, He taught your army not to fear ours. And nowhere was this lesson more powerfully demonstrated than in the snow-covered fields of Belgium in December 1944, where General George S. Patton and the men of the Third Army accomplished what many had thought impossible, forcing the elite 1st SS Panzer Division to retreat for the first time in World War II, shattering the myth of Nazi invincibility and helping to secure the freedom of Europe from tyranny. The story of this pivotal confrontation between America's most aggressive general and Germany's most fanatical division serves as a reminder that in the face of seemingly invincible adversity, determined leadership and courage can overcome even the most fearsome obstacles. It stands as a testament to the power of bold action in the pursuit of victory and to the enduring triumph of freedom over tyranny. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.